simple few minutes on the idea of compassion and what it can do for each of us individually, for our organizations, and hopefully even for our democracies, our governments. I simply have 3 questions for you, and then 3 challenges that I want to look at together. Then I have one thing that I want to try to turn over. I've been thinking one way for a very long time, and in preparing for this chance to speak with you all, my head got flipped. And if I can come away at the end of this morning, 15 minutes from now, somebody else's head might flip, I'd be very happy. And then one hope. Three questions. Do me a favor. Right hand. Are you compassionate? Right hand. Is your organization, the place you work maybe, or the place you associate with most, is it compassionate? Numbers went way down. What about your government? And please pick the one that you might call home, where I come from. I'm thinking of the U.S. for myself. I'm new to Geneva. I had the great pleasure of sitting with the Chancellor for a while, learning a great deal more about the democracy here. Maybe you live in a democracy, and some may not even. Is your government compassionate? The numbers went down again. There's almost nobody left. But what about this? Right hand. Could you be? Could your organization be? Could your country, your democracy be more compassionate? The numbers went way, way, way up. That's the thing that I most want to try to touch on today. What keeps us from being more compassionate? It's talked about in almost every religious tradition. It's prayed for. Have you experienced it coming to you? Have you given it? And yet, there's this notion, there's this sense that there's so much room to be more compassionate. What gets in our way for that? What keeps us from being able to do that? That's where I really want to go. But let's make sure we're talking about the same idea for a second. I want to try to move compassion in your thinking to a very action-oriented place. It should be a feeling, it can be a thought, but I also think it's an action. It's a place you go. There's an amazing center now at Stanford University in the United States, run by this monk, which is exploring specifically how we can put compassion into our organizational lives, into our governmental lives, and into our personal lives. And I came across this, and for me, this became the definition I wanted to work from. Chancellor very kindly brought up the idea of empathy, and the idea of sympathy, I think, even comes before that. But I wanted to try to present these as an ascending possibility, heading towards action. Sympathy, in my personal opinion, can be a first place where you can see suffering. Empathy becomes the place where you actually begin to feel that other's suffering. And compassion becomes the place where you want to take action to relieve that suffering. So you might want to look at it this way. You come across a person underneath a rock, and the sympathetic person might go, that hurts. The empathetic person might get under the rock and go, yeah, it really hurts. But I hope the compassionate person might go, I have got to get that rock off that person. And I think it's that idea that motivates what we have so much of here in Geneva, the humanitarian causes, places like the ICRC and many others, that want to take action to relieve that suffering. So you might go empathy, sympathy, compassion. What can I do? How can I help this unfold? It is a very organic, growing idea. Desmond Tutu helps us see the progress of it, the planting of the seed, the tending of it. And there is so much research today that is beginning to show us compassion can be taught. If you are thinking, I'm this much and I'm never going to be more compassionate, free yourself of that. Let it go. At the end of today, I hope you'll feel just a little bit more. But every place and all the research that we're showing is demonstrating to us that we can change children. We can help them learn to be more compassionate. We can help politicians to think in a more compassionate manner. And we can each challenge ourselves to be more compassionate. In thinking about this talk for 2 months, I came across what I see as 3 huge challenges to why we don't act more compassionately more often. And I wanted to walk those through with you. The first is what I will call continuousness. The second has to do with connection. And the final, countenance. Let's talk about continuousness for a second. Because it's Creative Mornings, I had to find a way to bring in some creativity theory. David Gellinson is an economist who has done a great deal of study about artists and when they are most capable and when they produce their greatest work. And he's come up with 2 categories. He talks about conceptualists and experimentalists. Conceptualists tend to work earlier in their life. Their masterworks come out quite young. They're fast, they're quick, it just happens. It's a very specific idea. They know what they want to say. And they get it up there, whether it's painting or in music or poetry or whatever it might be. They plan just a little, and then they do it, and it's over. It's done in seconds. Boom. He contrasts these people with experimentalists who tend to create very much later in their life cycle. They tend to be very, very slow, meticulous. No single idea, but many ideas that they're sort of exploring over and over and over and trying to weave together. Endless drafts. Endless drafts. You are looking at an endless draft. Shh, is the way they think. I'll give you a couple of examples. Picasso versus Cézanne. Picasso booms onto the art scene. His work is instantaneous. Have you ever seen the photos of him drawing with light? It's incredible. It happens in a second. Cézanne, he was so particular and worked on things so often. There are 6 and 7 canvases of exactly the same concept, most of which he wouldn't sign because he didn't think it was good enough. And people today hold these up as some of his masterworks. These are just 2 simple examples. I can give you others from lots of other places. Some of the thoughts, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, he wrote that when he was 29. It came out in no time at all. Versus Mark Twain, who published The Adventures of Huck Finn. It took him over 12 years to get that to where he felt it could be published. So it's not just creative art like this, or writing. Music. Anybody ever heard Paul Simon, Bridge Over Troubled Water? I was going to sing it for you, but I think I'm going to back off. He wrote that in 15 minutes as a young man early in his career, in a room full of people. And he stood up afterwards and said, "Where did that come from?" Anybody ever heard Hallelujah? A song that's been in a lot of movies, it's been in a lot of television. That song took almost 15 years to become an overnight sensation. Leonard Cohen wrote it, rewrote it, rewrote it. There are more than 90 written verses for this particular song. And yet, we all discovered it only after a cover of the song was done by a fellow who unfortunately died tragically. And that's how most people came to know the song. The point is, and how does this connect with compassion? I think one of the blocks that we have to acting more compassionately more often is we think of it a little bit more like the experimentalists. Did I say that right? I didn't say that right. We think of it more like the conceptualists than the experimentalists. We think of compassion as this thing that we should just instantly do when we see the moment. We see the person suffering. That's where it comes from, and it has to be born instantly. Versus this thing that gets worked on step by step. And if you go through your Rolodex in your head of maybe some ideas of the people who are most enduringly compassionate, you might pick a religious figure, you might pick somebody like a Mother Teresa, or maybe you know someone personally. The great skill to being more compassionate in part is taking that slower, longer, enduring approach to compassion. It's hard. The Dalai Lama himself has said you can't be compassionate 24/7. It's not within reach. But if we only have this boom moment where we think we can be compassionate, where we see on the television screen, oh my goodness, look at what's happening to those people. If that's what we count on, we're going to have fewer chances. We're going to be less compassionate. Connection. The second challenge. I wrestled with how I get this across, and I ended up having to absolutely borrow from someone I look up to. And I'm going to ask you to do it rather than have me explain it. Do me a favor. Somewhere near you, find a partner. If you want to stand up, move around, that's fine. If you just want to turn around front to back. But do me the favor of finding a partner you're not married to or significantly involved with, who is not your child, or is not your parent, or is not someone you work with very closely on a regular basis. Do me the favor and find that person right now. If you need to move seats, if you need to step a little bit, find someone. Look behind you, look in front of you, look sideways. I have to credit this to Patty Dye. Patty's a remarkable thinker who also has a fantastic TED Talk in which this is included. Have you found that person? I'll give you all the time you need in about 10 more seconds. Okay, do me a favor. Come face to face with that person. Turn so that you're looking at them. Find your connection. And do me a favor. Come as close as you can without getting really uncomfortable. Close but not really uncomfortable. Right to the edge of social convention. Okay, here's the hard part. I'm going to give you some questions that I want you to think about silently in close proximity to this person. So here's the tricky part. Please close your eyes. Face that person, but please close your eyes. Think. A favorite childhood game. The pieces, the rules, what was needed to win, where did you play it? A sanctuary, where you go, maybe to be still, to be at rest, to be at peace. Your first love, whatever that might be. Your first love. How did it come to exist? Where did it come from? A moment of great loss. Something that left you. And finally, please think about one of your greatest learnings. Something you learned that came to you. A true gift. Quietly. Open your eyes. Acknowledge your partner quietly. And now think. As deeply as you hold each of those things I just asked you to think about, that person holds something completely different. It's not the same. What matters to you so deeply isn't theirs. It's yours. What matters to them is theirs. It's not yours. How do we cross that distance? Look how close you are. Feel how far apart you are. How can we build compassion across that gap? Thank you, partner. That to me is the second challenge to compassion. We are so different. It is so easy, so fast to be able to say, I'm not them, they're not me. How do I connect that way? How can I put into action the sense that what's happened for them is something I want to make a positive difference about? Third challenge. Oh, sorry. This is mine, that's why it's not quoted. We have to find a way to find in ourselves the compassion for others we wish them to have for us. It's really tricky to do when you feel that gap, when you're aware of the distance between each of us. Third challenge. There is a great deal of research about how much is shared just from your face. I don't mean body language, I don't mean all the different things that we do. The French do this, the Swiss do that, those Americans, those nutty Americans, they do this. Just the face. And I actually think the face is usually that trigger for that fast piece of compassion. If you see that sadness, if you see that pain. But I also think the face can get between you and the other person. Genius fellow named Paul Ekman, and please do look him up, has established a set of ideas called the Facial Action Coding System, FACS. And if you put FACS and Ekman ECKMAN, you'll see it again in a minute, into a browser of your choice, you will find some remarkable information. Paul Ekman has spent almost 50 years studying how micro-expressions, the muscles in the face, react before you think, before you feel. It just happens. And, unbelievably to me, it's universal. It transcends culture because it's pre-culture. It's part of our animalistic reality. And if you learn to read these micro-expressions, you actually become a mind reader because you are seeing what the person is actually going on. It's fast, but did you catch my little smile? Or did you catch my little, I'm not happy? Take a look at this. A, B, C. Which one's the compassionate face? Which one would you say is the compassionate? Can I see hands for A? Can I see hands for B? Can I see hands for C? According to Ekman and the FACS, it is the middle one. It is B. But can you just see how subtle some of these differences are between these different expressions? B being compassion. A is thought of as just neutral, not reactive yet. And C is judgmental, or making a decision about the other person, heading towards contempt. Ekman got to the place with this where he could actually look at pictures of people from cultures he'd never been to and make really remarkable ethnographies about who and what they are. These faces, though, while they might stimulate us to compassion, they can also turn us off, turn our compassion to zero in seconds. So I'm wondering about the face of compassion. When you hear that, what do you think of? What comes to your mind as the face of compassion? I wanted to respect what I understand to be the Muslim request that you not depict the Prophet, but I could have put something of that up here. I could have put other religious traditions up here. I could have put people that we think of often as highly compassionate. What comes to your mind? Here's the kicker about FACS. Ekman has determined, and it's been demonstrated in research, that when you put the certain face on, you build that feeling. The emotion actually starts from the face out. What that means is, if we want to be more compassionate, the first thing we have to do is make a face of compassion. So let me ask you something. What's your face of compassion? Sit more comfortably. Feel your face for a second. Go ahead. Can you put a compassionate face on? I'd like to see it. I'd enjoy it. I'm hoping you're feeling some compassion towards me. Go ahead. Let me see your face of compassion. Oh, come on. Does it include a bigger smile? Flatter? I can't get rid of this thing anymore in the middle of my... People have told me, oh gosh, you do this work for the ICRC and you work with the people inside there. You must be so kind and thoughtful. People have been telling me that, I don't think I have a compassionate face. I think I'm always worried. How do I let that go? How do you let that go? Can you build a compassionate face that you can give to others to help us all be more compassionate? I see those as the three big challenges to us being more compassionate. But here's the part I want to flip. When I started thinking about this, and I think the Chancellor mentioned it in one of the books she was talking about, it has to be about everybody else. We can only be compassionate if we're thinking about everybody else. And I was like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable with that in one sense, because human beings are, in some regards, selfish. It's part of taking care of ourselves. It's part of survival. It goes, again, back before culture. And I was really not comfortable with the idea that I was going to contradict the Dalai Lama. I wasn't comfortable with that at all. But I was really fortunate to find two things. From a very different voice than the Dalai Lama, to think about compassion as actually the requirement for survival. And that we do it for ourselves. We don't have to be compassionate only for the other, but that we do it for ourselves. Have you noticed anything about some of the people who do really compassionate work, or some of the organizations that do really compassionate work, or even some of the best democracies, governments? I have this sense that often compassion, and please stay with me, is almost hollow. It's all directed outward. It's always about the other. The ICRC does these remarkable things all over the globe, trying to relieve suffering, trying to restore dignity. I got news for you, and I got permission to say this. They are not as nice to each other as they are to everybody else. Is your government as nice to its own people, its inward, as it may be outward? Are you? And this, for me, is the key. Are you as compassionate to yourself as you are to those around you? At one iteration of this talk, I was in conversation with about the most compassionate person I know, who I'm also gifted to have been married to for 26 years, closing 27 now. And she said, you're not going to tell people that they have to be compassionate all the time, are you? Is that a good idea? I don't know if you can be compassionate all the time. The Dalai Lama does not agree that that's possible. I don't know that you should go out into that world that's outside the door and thinking that it can be every moment. Except for yourself. I am going to ask that you be selfish with compassion, that you look after yourself, so that the chance for more compassion going outward exists. So no, 24/7 compassion for every other human being on the planet, don't try it. It won't work. But for yourself. And the research is overwhelming that when you are compassionate, self, and then outward, there are health benefits, there are social benefits. It's where things get good. But the first piece has to start with being compassionate for yourself. So here is my one hope, that your compassion and our growth, our effort to grow compassion for our world We'll start very close to home, very close to you. Inside, selfishly, look after yourself. Look after your organization. Look after your democracy. Can you take a kind face forward? Can you see? Can you overcome that distance between you and the other? Build the needed connection. Can you try that longer, slower approach to compassion of those who may come later in life to their greatest masterwork, rather than thinking of compassion as, I saw it on the news and I have to do something? Can you build it that way? I too am an optimist. I know you can. I hope